His Majesty King Charles has reportedly reached a point of deep frustration. In the face of a growing diplomatic row between Britain and France, sparked by the extraordinary and provocative seizure of a small British fishing boat by the French Navy, the monarch is said to be making his displeasure known in quiet but highly symbolic ways. This incident, while seemingly minor in isolation, has quickly evolved into a flashpoint with profound national implications. And make no mistake, this is being seen as nothing less than a deliberate affront to British sovereignty. The facts are stark and unambiguous. A modest, family-operated fishing boat from Eastbourne, named Lady T in tribute to former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, was seized by French naval forces. The captain was detained and slapped with an eye-watering £70,000 fine, allegedly for fishing just a few miles off the French coast, perhaps without appropriate documentation. The reaction from French authorities has been widely condemned as disproportionate, provocative, and politically motivated. What makes this episode all the more egregious is the broader context in which it has unfolded. While the French authorities dedicate their resources to chasing down small British boats, the same coastline sees a relentless tide of illegal migrant vessels heading for the United Kingdom every single day. These dinghies, often dangerously overcrowded and operated by people smugglers, rarely intercepted by French naval patrols. Instead, the French Navy has been accused of not only failing to act but at times actively escorting migrant vessels into British territorial waters. All of this while receiving considerable sums from the British taxpayer under the guise of a bilateral agreement intended to address the crisis. In contrast, a small British fishing boat has been treated with extraordinary hostility. This, say critics, is not about the enforcement of maritime regulations, but a political message, one of retaliation, vengeance, and, in many eyes, cowardice. Reports emerging from within the French fishing industry suggest that this act was in direct response to the recent fining of a French trawler by British authorities for violating UK fishing laws. Rather than address the legal issues through diplomacy, the French response has been to pick a symbolic target, one that would send a message not just to Westminster, but to the British public: challenge us, and we will make you pay. Yet the backlash in Britain has been swift and fierce. Fishermen's unions, political commentators, and everyday citizens have expressed outrage, seeing this incident as the latest in a long line of provocations. The choice of vessel, Lady T, was no coincidence. Naming the boat after the Iron Lady herself, Margaret Thatcher, imbues it with layers of political symbolism. And by seizing it, the French authorities have drawn a line in the Channel, daring Britain to respond. Amid the political silence emanating from Westminster, it is the Crown that appears to be showing resolve. While King Charles is constitutionally barred from making overt political interventions, those close to the palace have made it clear that he is watching events unfold with increasing concern. Known for his preference for subtle diplomacy rather than grandstanding, the king is said to have quietly postponed a scheduled royal visit to France, an unmistakable signal in the world of international relations. The message is simple: Britain does not extend royal courtesies to nations that intimidate its citizens and undermine its sovereignty. The symbolism harks back to the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who refused to set foot in Argentina following the invasion of the Falkland Islands. Just as her actions once sent a message of British resolve, King Charles's quiet rebuke today seeks to uphold that same principle: sovereignty is not up for negotiation. And make no mistake, the stakes are higher than one fishing boat. This issue has become a litmus test for the broader post-Brexit order. British fishermen were promised a resurgence in control over their waters, the right to fish freely, and the restoration of national maritime sovereignty. Yet, nearly a decade after the referendum, many feel abandoned and betrayed. They see French trawlers exploiting British waters while their own boats are hemmed in by bureaucracy and, increasingly, hostility. Where is the leadership from Westminster? Sir Keir Starmer has remained noticeably silent, offering no defence of British fishermen, no condemnation of the French actions, and no reassurance to coastal communities that their concerns matter. Indeed, Starmer's Labour Party has already indicated a willingness to grant France extended access to British fishing grounds, 12 more years of it, no less. In the eyes of many, this amounts to a betrayal of Brexit's promise and a capitulation to European pressure. As number 10 dithers and debates, the people demand action. Why are we financing French border patrols that appear unwilling to control their own shores? Why are we funding a system that facilitates illegal migration, undermines our border control, and penalizes our own citizens? These are questions that resonate from Dover to Hull, from Cornwall to the Scottish Isles, and yet they continue to be met with silence. Meanwhile, tensions continue to rise in the Channel. British boats are monitored, harassed, and seized, while French vessels operate with impunity. GB News, which captured footage of the incident, revealed the galling image of a massive French trawler docked right next to the detained Lady T, untouched and entirely unbothered. French police, when approached for comment, shrugged their shoulders. "It's Sunday," they said. "We don't work Sundays." And yet, somehow, they found time to detain a British skipper and levy a fine large enough to bankrupt most small fishing operations. The message from Paris is clear: Britain will be punished for asserting its maritime rights. But the response from the British public is equally clear: enough is enough. This is no longer a diplomatic footnote, it is a test of national resilience, of whether Britain will allow itself to be treated with contempt by a neighbour who, time and again, has failed to honour its obligations. And in the midst of this storm, it is King Charles, not the political class, who appears to be carrying the torch of national dignity. The King's message may be quiet, even understated, but in the world of diplomacy, such gestures speak volumes. The delayed visit, the palace's carefully chosen silence, the subtle withdrawal of royal warmth, these are not empty gestures. They are part of a long British tradition of saying more through symbolism than through saber-rattling. France would do well to take note. The British people are watching. Their king is watching. And while the government may remain hesitant, the Crown, at least, remembers what sovereignty means. This is no longer merely a question of fishing rights. It speaks to something far greater, something more fundamental. It is about sovereignty, self-determination, and the right of a sovereign nation to defend its maritime borders without apology or interference. The crisis unfolding in the English Channel, exacerbated by France's brazen actions against a modest British vessel, lays bare the uncomfortable reality: Britain's post-Brexit independence is being tested, and our leaders appear unwilling, or unable, to rise to the moment. While Labour figures in Westminster speak of resetting relations with Europe and diplomatic reconciliation, Britain's fishermen, those most directly impacted by European overreach, are paying the price for this political appeasement. These are the very communities who were promised renewed rights and revitalized fortunes in the aftermath of Brexit. Instead, they find themselves sacrificed on the altar of political expediency and weak leadership. But this time, the public is not turning a blind eye. There is a sense that the British people are finally waking up to the duplicity. GB News is documenting the injustices. And perhaps most notably, King Charles is said to be watching with growing concern. Because when British citizens are fined, intimidated, and their livelihoods threatened, by a so-called ally, no less, it becomes imperative for someone to speak with moral clarity. If the Prime Minister will not do so, perhaps it is for the Crown to send a signal that silence is no longer acceptable. The message is clear: France, cease the provocation. Cease the harassment. Stop the boats, or Britain will stop cooperating. And if that cooperation does end, the repercussions will not merely be symbolic. They will be diplomatic, economic, and historic. What we are witnessing is not an isolated maritime skirmish. It may well be the opening salvo in a new phase of the post-Brexit era, one where Britain no longer bends to the will of Brussels or the bullying of Paris. That the tide is turning is thanks not only to a defiant crew aboard a boat named after Margaret Thatcher but to the power of independent journalism and the quiet vigilance of the monarch. Meanwhile, elsewhere in British political discourse, another mask is slipping. In a moment of global reckoning, with war crimes potentially unfolding before the world's eyes, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Angela Rayner, is unable, or unwilling, to utter the truth. In the face of harrowing reports from Gaza, where starvation is being used as a tool of war and children perish in temporary shelters, Rayner hesitates. She is asked whether Israel may be violating international law, and her response is to hide behind legal technicalities. "It's not for me to determine," she says. But is that truly the role of leadership? When Russia flattened Mariupol, Labour MPs queued up to denounce it as a war crime. Yet now, when Israel faces similar accusations, from no less an authority than the International Criminal Court, Labour's leadership suddenly finds its voice faltering. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for both Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, citing the use of starvation as a weapon of war. 8 trucks have been blocked. The death toll among civilians is soaring. Tents have become graves for innocent women and children. And still, Rayner refuses to speak plainly. This is not diplomacy. It is cowardice, and the double standards are glaring. Let us be clear. 14 Palestinians were killed just this week, among them a mother and 2 young children blown apart in what was meant to be a place of refuge. Food is being rationed not because it is scarce, but because its entry is being deliberately obstructed. Even Sir Keir Starmer's joint statement with President Macron and Prime Minister Trudeau acknowledged that Israel's response has been wholly inadequate. Yet Rayner cannot bring herself to declare what is already obvious to much of the world. She dodges. She equivocates. She avoids the moral weight of the question. Because to admit that Israel's actions may breach international law would be to undermine Labour's carefully constructed balancing act, one that seeks to appease donors, Brussels, and Washington all at once. This is a party that wants to claim the moral high ground while refusing to hold its allies accountable. It speaks of human rights while ignoring their flagrant abuse. It insists on upholding international law while denying its application to one of the most contentious and scrutinized conflicts of our time. And while Rayner dithers, the contradictions pile up. Israel's Prime Minister has accused Britain of siding with terrorists, claiming that Downing Street is sympathetic to Hamas. That is the same ally Rayner calls true. A government that publicly derides Britain's foreign policy, and yet Labour insists the alliance must not be questioned. What are they so afraid of? Angela Rayner's silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. Her reluctance to speak the truth reflects a deeper malaise within Labour's leadership, an unwillingness to offend, a terror of saying the wrong thing, a fear of losing favour with influential international actors and domestic voting blocs. By contrast, even Conservative MP Kim Badenoch, hardly a figure untainted by controversy, has managed to articulate what Labour cannot. She warns that Starmer's moral grandstanding is incoherent, that his failure to define Britain's position risks emboldening the very actors we claim to oppose. If Hamas is applauding your press statements, Badenoch suggests, perhaps it's time to rethink your messaging. But from Labour, we get only confusion. They condemn Israeli military actions, then refuse to label them illegal. They denounce Netanyahu's policies, then reaffirm the strength of the UK-Israel alliance. They proclaim their commitment to international law but will not apply it consistently. And at the core of it all is one unmistakable truth: cowardice. This is a party that wants to strut confidently upon the world stage but is too afraid to take a moral position. Too afraid to upset the White House. Too afraid to disrupt its own fragile internal coalition. Too afraid to tell the British people the truth about what is happening in Gaza. If Angela Rayner truly believed in the rule of law, she would have said it plainly and without hesitation: yes, starvation of civilians is a war crime. Yes, blocking humanitarian aid is unlawful. Yes, the ICC is fully justified in investigating and prosecuting such acts. But she said none of that. Instead, she deflected. She evaded. She crumbled. And in doing so, she did not simply fail to lead, she revealed everything that is hollow in Labour's moral posturing. Angela Rayner had an opportunity to demonstrate conviction. She chose cowardice. And that will not be forgotten, not in Westminster, not in Gaza, and certainly not by the electorate.